So let me say a very good morning to you and welcome you to Inside Pages on Metro Television. My name is Moro Awudu. Inside Pages is your favorite current affairs program on the weekend, so Saturday mornings. And what we essentially do here, technically speaking, what we do is we dig into the pages of the most topical issues that have made the news headlines in the course of the week. We bring the right guests and we ask them the relevant questions. And that's going to be exactly what we're going to be doing this morning. And so the issues for us, well, first of all, let me say thanks for watching the Reporter's Block. I hope you enjoyed it. But the issues for us are quite straightforward. Now, I'm sure you do know that Ghana has begun the processes of engaging the International Monetary Fund. Now, we would want to understand on this program what the implications for this engagement will mean for Ghana, and more importantly, for the ordinary Ghanaian. Remember that the TUC has long kicked against any attempt to engage the IMF. And so how is all of this going to play out? Okay, so I'm talking TUC, so ordinary Ghanaian. And then also the second topic we'll be looking at. So there were scores of Ghanaians that poured onto the streets of this, the streets of Accra. It's called the Arise Ghana group. Now, the group is asking that, or they're protesting what they call maladministration, so poor governance or bad governance, and then economic hardship. And we saw that happen. It was a 48-hour thing, so 2 days straight. They've been protesting. We saw there have been all kinds of things that happened during this demonstration. So the group will also be joining me a little later on the show for us to look at what's next for them, whether the aim has been achieved and what is next for them. Now, let me immediately begin my conversation this morning because that's what has got a lot of Ghanaians talking. And I'm talking about our decision to engage the IMF because of the current state of the Ghanaian economy. The Ghanaian economy is very challenged. It is really, really struggling. And so the government has decided to start engaging the IMF to see what the IMF can do for us in order to bring the economy back on track. Let me quickly go to the Zoom line and speak to Mr. Joe Jackson. Mr. Joe Jackson is the Director of Operations with Dalex Finance, but more importantly, we speak to him on matters of finance and economy because of his depth of knowledge. And so let me welcome Mr. Joe Jackson to the show, and we'll take it from there. Good morning, sir. Thank you very much for joining us on Inside Pages. We're always happy to have you on the show, sir.
Moro, it's a pleasure, really. Sadly, today I can't be at the studio.
Right.
So we can't meet after the show for our usual watching. So that's right.
Well, as Muslims, we say Allah knows best. God knows best.
He knows best.
Anyway.
But I'm glad to be on this show this morning. Right. I suppose the social media, the regular media has all been abuzz with the issue of going to the IMF.
Absolutely.
And I'm glad to talk about it because I have been talking about this issue for a really long time.
Right. Now, perhaps let me ask you this. Did you see this coming? I mean, based on the data that you have with you, did you see this coming? And are you one of those who think that perhaps we should have done this much earlier, perhaps say last year instead of this year? Where do you stand?
Listen, the biggest reference I can give is that in November last year, I spoke to a large group of credit unions, and I said to them that this year we will go to the IMF. That the trajectory of our economic management is such that we're heading for there, and I don't see any alternative. Because of political issues, it may take us a long time to cut to that decision, but there was no other way I saw out. I repeated it for another group of persons in January this year, and even in March this year, despite all the, all the disavowals of the IMF made by the powers that be, I said, we don't have an option. So am I surprised? No. Do I think we should have gone much earlier? A big yes. Listen, if you have a sore on your toe and you go to you want to go to the doctors, you might say, I may have to cut off your toe. But if you don't, and you say, I don't want to cut off my toe, The next time you go after the infection, they might say, now we have to cut off your ankle. And if you don't go early enough, you're going to end up and somebody will say, I have to cut off your leg at your knee. Listen,
where do you think we find ourselves now? Are we at the point where perhaps it is our hands that are going to be cut, our knees, the entire body is going to be? Where are we now?
I think at this moment we're going to be cut off at the thigh.
That's serious.
That's serious. It's going to be a lot of pain. Remember that the more you wait, the more desperate you are, the worse your situation is as you go to ask for help, the more painful the remedy will be. The more difficult it will be to negotiate a good deal with the IMF. There's no space now. We're facing, listen, I say to people that yesterday was a very sad day. You know why it was a sad day?
Tell me.
It was a sad day because we've always said things are going bad. But we've always heard the powers that be say, we will not go to the IMF under any circumstances. We will not go, we will not go, we will not go. Now, the powers that be understand the political backlash that will come from going to the IMF. They understand it clearly. On Monday, John Mahama was on record to say, go to the IMF. So on Tuesday, if we end up in the IMF under these circumstances, it shows how dire the situation is. It shows that we really have no option. It shows that all cards are on the table. There's no other option. If there was another option, we will not be with the IMF.
Interesting.
So rather than anybody jubilate that we told you so, we should be, whoa, this is a tough situation. This is evidence of how dire the situation is. Listen, everybody has egg on his face. Our Honorable, His Excellency, the President himself, the Minister of Finance, the Deputy Ministers of Finance, and the list goes on and on. Each one of them have egg on their face. They won't do this lightly. They will do this when there's no other option.
So,
if there's anything
right,
I want to tell this, your listening public today,
right?
Please don't jubilate. The situation is dire.
Right. But the government had earlier started what it termed as its own homegrown solutions. One of it was the introduction of the e-levy. And then we also heard about some cuts on wages and government expenditure, some 20 billion Ghana cedis and so on and so forth. Is this to suggest that these homegrown solutions were not enough, and that's why we have to go to the IMF?
Listen, let's look at the homegrown solutions. Let's start with the e-levy, which I supported and I still support because I always felt that the situation, reading the tea leaves, the situation was dire. The e-levy only brought in what? If we are to believe what the Gabi or Tredako says, and they say if we are to believe what he says, the e-levy brought 60 million instead of the expected 600 million. I mean, I would never have believed that it would bring 600 million, but I also never would have thought that it would have brought as low as 60 million. The e-levy was a problem from day one. And let's look at the cuts that were purported to have been made. Those cuts of cuts in salaries, fuel coupons, travel fees, etc. All those amounted to a total of 3.5 billion cedis. Now, remember that our budget was going to come in at 100.5 billion cedis. So if you cut 3.5 billion cedis, you've cut less than 4%.
And that's a drop in the ocean.
That's not a significant cut.
Right.
That's not a cut that will reassure the markets. So if you think that at this moment we are in trouble and we've gone to the IMF, then realize that the cuts are going to be a lot more biting than 3.5%.
Right.
That's why I say there's going to be a lot of pain.
Now,
right? Those solutions did not work.
Right.
The revenue side did not bring in the revenue expected, and the expenditure side was not tough enough.
Are we going to the IMF because we need them to just give us money, or there's more to the reason why we're going to the IMF?
There's a lot of reasons why we're going to the IMF.
Okay.
Of course, whatever money they will give us, it will be very much appreciated, and they will give us some amount of money. But more important, the IMF will restore confidence in the fact that Ghana is facing up to its problems. And with that confidence will be hopefully a return of the money that has flown out of this country when they felt that our problems were overwhelming us. So those are two important things. A return to the IMF also gives the reigning government a convenient whipping dog to do some of the things that it knows it has to do that are politically unpalatable, and to say these are the conditions of the IMF. So it does a number of things. But it's not going to be easy. Not on the government, not on the Ministry of Finance, not definitely on the Ghanaian public.
So more importantly, I mean, yes, we need the money, but more importantly is the fact that we need policy credibility to enable persons who would want to lend us money to feel more comfortable to lend us money.
That I'll put top of the agenda.
Right.
Policy credibility.
Okay.
I'll put top of the agenda.
Right. So what would be the implications of this decision to go to the IMF? One, to the economy, and then two, to ordinary Ghanaians. And I'm asking this question in light of what the TUC has already said. They had already warned the government that, look, don't go to the IMF. They, I'm sure, know what will happen to them if the IMF conditionalities begin to bite. No?
Okay, now listen. If we start from the premise that we are spending too much and that Ghana is broke because we spend more than we earn, then obviously anybody coming to help us will start from the expenditure side. Let's start from the top. We spend 50% of our income on servicing our debt. The IMF is going to come in with some money, and then IMF hopefully will come in and say, let's help you reschedule your debt. Let's give you some credibility to be able to reschedule some of the debt. That starts from the top. What's the next thing on the line? It's our salaries. Our salaries are too much. They run to 50% of all the revenue we make. So that when you add those two items, it's over 100% already. So, well, going to the IMF simply means that there are going to be some significant cuts to salary. Maybe not directly, but definitely there will be no hiring. Definitely every single person employed by the government will have to be justified, starting from those at the presidency right down to those in some local government in the Northeast. But whatever it is, government salaries will have to be reviewed, looked at, employees will have to be looked at, because it just consumes too much of our money. As an economy, do we say that we will spend 50% of all our income on less than 600,000 people when this economy is over 32 million people? No, we can't do that. So unfortunately for the TUC, it's going to mean that what they are afraid of will come true. There'll be a freeze on salaries. There might even be some layoffs. There might even be a look at cutting salaries across board. Well, when I talk about pain, those are some of the things that we are looking at.
That's interesting. Now, Big Joe, I want to know whether, in 2015, when we signed up to an IMF program. At the time, it was Setekwe was then the finance minister. We do recall that the documents that we presented to the IMF were fallouts from the Senchi Concourse. The Senchi Forum. Sorry about that. The Senchi Forum. And Tekwe kept mentioning or terming it as homegrown policies. They were taken to the IMF for the IMF to endorse, to bless, or to approve, or however you want to term it. This government, per the statement that was issued by the information minister, tells us that they have a homegrown policy as well. I haven't seen it. I'm not sure you have seen it as well. Do you think it will be in the interest of the government to discuss these policies they intend to present to the IMF for scrutiny, etc., before the IMF finally gets hold of it, and then, we'll take it from there? Because they may be presenting some policies that may have dire implications for certain, sectors of the economy, and so on and so forth. But then it has already been presented, so they can't do anything about it. Would you have wished that we saw these documents before they're presented before the IMF?
Okay, Moro, I'm going to answer that question, but I'm also going to ask you, after I've answered this question, to go back to another question that we've left out, which is, we've talked about how this will affect the private sector employees. Let's talk about how it will public sector employees. We will also have to talk about how it will affect the private sector.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll come back to that.
Right.
But to answer your question, listen, the last thing I want to do at this moment is to put even more pressure on the team that is going to negotiate this deal. First of all, whatever you present, it matters, but doesn't really matter also, because the IMF is going to send a mission, it's going to ask you to open your books, it's going to review the situation, and it's going to negotiate a deal with you. Having a position before you go is well enough, but they will also come with a position. After all, it's their money. He who pays the piper calls the tune. So, listen, at this moment, I really don't want to put any more pressure on the government. They are under pressure enough having to say the situation is so dire that we have to go to the IMF. So I'll say, whether their policies are known or not, I'm confident of one thing. Whatever the policies are that they present, it has to meet IMF standards. It has to meet the IMF team's appreciation of of how deep, how wide our problems are. So listen, if you have solutions that you're taking, well and good. If you don't have solutions and you have to listen to them, well and good. At this moment, we want to wait. We want to see whether the negotiations make progress and how quickly progress will be made. Because remember, there's one thing. All we have done is to ask the IMF for help. We have not agreed to the program. We have not agreed to the timelines. We have not agreed to the conditionalities and the performance indicators that will come with that. And that agreement is not set in stone. We know of Sri Lanka, where 2 days ago they announced that there's a stalemate, and that even though they've gone to the IMF, they've not been able to come to an agreement. So going to the IMF doesn't mean that all of a sudden there's a program to be started. In fact, we haven't even had a mission come to Ghana for the negotiations to start. Maybe some of it may be virtual, I don't know. But as I said, I tell you one thing, the hard work is about to begin. Let's not even put more pressure on the government, because the situation is bad enough as it is.
Briefly, you wanted to touch on the implications of an IMF program on the private sector briefly before we move to our next two questions, so we can wrap it up. So you wanted to wrap up on the issue of an IMF program and its implications for the private sector.
Yes, for the private sector, for a company like Delex, the announcement of an IMF program brings a bit of joy and relief. Remember that as we sit, look at the financial sector. Interest rates have gone from 12.52 for a 91-day T-bill to 24.68 as at last week. That's a doubling of interest rates. The IMF announcement may bring some stability to those issues, because at least we know that every journey starts with the first step, and the first step has been taken. So it will bring some stability to the financial sector, I believe. So this chaotic financial sector that we've had in the last few months will at least start to stabilize, which would mean that all of us can take a deep breath after all the challenges that we have faced going forward in the last few months. For the ordinary man in the street, nothing is going to change for a couple of months. The IMF program hasn't started yet. Nothing is going to change. But surely you will see the changes if and when the program starts. So I would say that for the next 90 days, nothing much is going to happen. And if, God willing, there's an agreement, you're going to start to feel the pinch after that. But bear in mind that the IMF has also learned a lot from previous programs. So there are definitely going to be program attachments that will mitigate the worst part of their their adjustment policies to the most vulnerable in our society. So for the most vulnerable, some relief may be coming up. For most of the private sector, nothing is going to change. For the financial sector, we're going to be able to take a deep breath after a turbulent 3 months.
I want to know whether the exogenous factors such as COVID and the Ukraine-Russia war will play a big factor in the IMF's determination of the kinds of conditionalities they intend to give us. They say, well, we can sympathize with you because of COVID and Ukraine and Russia, and so we may want to tone down on how harsh the conditionalities are going to be. Or you think it wouldn't play any role at all? I mean, these are things that people would say, that people would argue, were out of our hands. We couldn't have done anything about Ukraine and Russia, and also, and then COVID. Or they would want to look more at our internal arrangement in determining what kinds of conditionalities go. So those are the things that I'll need you to explain to us in greater detail.
Well, first of all, the IMF itself, anyone who reads what the IMF has been putting out, IMF admits that COVID and the Ukraine-Russia war have wrought havoc on our economies. And it's not just Ghana. A lot of countries are facing debt distress, high inflation, slowing down growth. And so we're not alone in this. And the IMF has actually put quite a large sum of money aside, expecting that over the next few months, there'll be a lot more countries like Ghana coming to them to ask for help.
In fact, we're looking at $70 billion US dollars, as the IMF has said.
Thank you very much. I think it will be too small, but that's another discussion altogether.
Right.
Listen, that is in our favor.
Right. Sorry about that. I think we have a challenge with our Zoom link. Would work on that as quickly as possible. But the former president, we'll work on the Zoom link and get him back on the line so we can wrap up on this conversation. But the former president, John Dramani Mahama, has issued a statement, and it's in reaction to government's intention to engage the IMF. So he says, I welcome President Akufo-Addo's decision to formally engage the IMF with a view to entering into a program under the fund. Though belated, it should mark an important step towards addressing the dire economic situation, which has left Ghanaians wallowing under intense suffering and hardship. Now, beyond the announcement of engagement with the IMF, a comprehensive homegrown program should be fashioned out and presented to the fund for support. It is imperative that a team of skilled and competent negotiators is put together to obtain the best set of measures with the fund. The finance minister, who has supervised the disastrous collapse of the economy, cannot and should not be a part of the team of negotiators. He has lost credibility and the trust and confidence of stakeholders in our economy. President Akufo-Addo must take a bold decision to replace his finance minister immediately with a more assured and competent person who is willing and able to work tirelessly to turn our almost hopeless situation around. In addition, given his obvious failures, the Vice President must be relieved of his responsibility as chair of the economic management team to enable the President to reconstitute the team. We must draw useful lessons from this episode and avoid cheap politicking with the economy that can only yield the disastrous outcomes that have brought us here. So that's from the former president, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama. So I want to believe that Mr. Joe Jackson is back online. Mr. Joe Jackson, I guess we have a clear line now. So let me ask you this question, which is a fallout from what the former president has issued by way of a statement. He says, and I'm going to read verbatim. He said, beyond the announcement of engagement with the IMF, a comprehensive homegrown program should be fashioned out, presented to the fund for support. It is imperative that a team of skilled and competent negotiators is put together to obtain the best set of measures with the fund. The finance minister, who has supervised the disastrous collapse of the economy, cannot and should not be part of the team of negotiators. He has lost credibility and the trust and confidence of stakeholders in our economy. President Akufo-Addo must also take a bold decision to replace his finance minister immediately with a more assured and competent person who is willing and able to work tirelessly to turn our almost hopeless situation around. In addition, it said, given his obvious failures, the vice president must be relieved of his responsibility as chair of the economic management team to enable the president to reconstitute the team. What do you make of what the former president is asking the president to do?
This is politics. It won't change anything.
Right.
It won't change anything. I don't think that even the President Mahama truly in his heart believes that this is going to make any difference. Right? I'll be utterly shocked if the president listened to what Mahama was saying, simply because it's politics. Now, the truth of the matter is this. At this moment, we need the best deal possible. Just maybe this present team who did not want to go to the IMF, who had to be dragged screaming and shouting to this point, who had to really see things for how bad they are, or they were before they went to the IMF, maybe they might just be the best thing to negotiate on our behalf. Because they will be going there with their eyes wide open, knowing that every single concession they make will be scrutinized and will be looked at, because we will be using their own words against them. At this moment, I have no reason to say that this team should not be part of, anybody in the present economic team should not be part of that negotiation. If anything at all, maybe the best person to make peace is the general who's been to war.
But you know what, Mr. Joe Jackson, you might want to term it as politics from the former president, but I've heard Professor Lord Mensah, who's actually made the same request. He says he doesn't think that the current managers of economy should be part of the team of negotiators because, obviously, in his view, they have failed.
I don't think that is realistic. Okay. We need to open the books. We need accountability, transparency to know how bad the situation is.
Right.
If you bring in another team, how are we going to be able to do that? How will the IMF get a full grasp of what our situation is? As much as you may think that this current regime may not have performed, it's not realistic to ask for another team. It's just not realistic. So, as much as I can see how there's a feeling of failure, and we feel frustrated and angered by how long it's taking us to get to this place and the admission that things are that bad. Listen, we're stuck with this team for the foreseeable future. That's how I see things.
All right. Finally, and I would need that to you. I need you to respond to this in seconds, if you can. Should we scrap e-levy? Because e-levy was supposed to be the partnership to solving all economic challenges, especially the face of fiscal slippages. But now we are going to the IMF. Remember that government spokespersons have told us that once there's e-levy, we don't have to go to the IMF. So should we scrap e-levy?
First of all, e-levy was vastly oversold. Right. E-levy was just one weapon in the arsenal of things that we had to fix our challenges. E-levy cannot be removed.
Joe, what I'm saying, Joe, this is my question. My question is, one of the reasons that was giving us to why Ghanaians must accept e-levy, because we said once you accept e-levy, and the finance minister himself has said that I'll prefer that you accept e-levy instead of us going to the IMF. So we had options. The option is we do e-levy, forget about IMF, or we go IMF, forget about e-levy. So now, but the question is, why must we have the two at the same time?
I'm telling you that e-levy was oversold. And anybody who thought that the e-levy was an alternative to going to the IMF was living in a different land.
Okay.
And was not reading the tea leaves right.
All right.
E-levy will stay, and the IMF, hopefully, will also come.
Interesting. Wow. But would that be fair to us?
Well, it's not about fairness. It's about paying and fixing your problems. At this moment, I don't think anybody in Ghana can ask for fairness.
Yeah, but Joe, that's
between a rock and a very hard place.
Yeah, but Joe, that's a double whammy. I'm paying e-levy, and there's IMF conditionalities also coming.
It is. Face it. Let's face this. Let's face up to this squarely. One of the things we've not done is to face up to our problems.
Okay. All right.
If we had faced up to our problems, we wouldn't even be in this situation now.
Okay.
Face up to it. The situation is dire, and you may need both the e-levy and the IMF conditionalities.
Okay. All right, Mr. Joe Jackson, thank you very much for talking to us. It's been a pleasure having you, sir.
Moro, I just want to tell you this. There's always hope. There's always hope. And I woke up this morning with renewed hope that once we are facing up to our challenges,
right,
we will fix it.
All right. That's Mr. Joe Jackson. It's always a pleasure talking to him. He's a patriotic citizen, very passionate about this country. He's the chief director of operations at Dalex Finance, but speaks to the media oftentimes on issues of finance and economy. I want to thank you very much for his time. But let me also do this briefly with the Chief Crusader of the Crusaders against the corruption, Emmanuel Wilson Jr. He's joined me in the studio this morning. He has very interesting views to share on Ghana's decision to engage the IMF. So, Emmanuel Wilson, why don't we say a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us on Inside Pages. So, what are your thoughts about us going to the IMF? What do you have to say?
Well, Moro, let me first start by saying that as a country, we should start upping our game.
Right.
The level of tolerance when it comes to mediocrity is too alarming.
How do you mean?
Ghanaians seems to be embracing mediocre leaders.
I see.
We celebrate mediocrity instead of celebrating excellence.
Okay.
And that is why we can even use the taxpayers' money to organize a kinky party.
Right.
Because we have come out of an IMF program,
right,
only for us to be going back in about 3 or so years. And we still have people defending this and talking about it.
Right.
Now, the other thing we should also know is that as citizens, it is time for us to start electing leaders who will govern our economy, not based on partisan lines, but based on competence and integrity. We need leaders who are men and women of their words, and not just women and men who will come out and be voted for because of the party colors that they associate themselves with. The question we keep asking ourselves is, IMF, why have we gotten to this stage? And Crusaders Against Corruption, we say that the very moment we acknowledged as leaders or as people in this country that our economy was in a big mess, we realized that in any situation of such as ours, there are two options for us.
Okay.
The first one is we can decide that we'll keep borrowing.
Okay.
So that we can meet up the expenses that we have.
Right.
Or we can decide that we'll cut down on expenditure. Over the past period, it looks like we have deliberately, as a nation, decided to close our eyes on the second option. And all we do is to keep borrowing,
okay,
keep borrowing, keep borrowing. And no wonder, as we speak, our debt to GDP as a country is above 70%.
Okay.
And this is unacceptable anywhere. You see, going to IMF, it is simply an indication that we currently have an economy that is not stable.
Okay.
We have an economy that its foundations or fundamentals are very weak. And so it has gone beyond our hands now. We can't do much about it.
Right.
And so we are going out to an international organization to bail us out.
Okay.
IMF will come in with conditionalities, whether we like them it or not. And it is these conditionalities in the eyes and the views of IMF that is supposed to stabilize this economy.
Okay.
It is worrying that as leaders, leaders of this country seem not to be thinking outside the box, and all they want to do is to get to this stage where they would rather want to fall on an institution outside this country to take care of our economy for us.
Right.
Look, there hasn't been any country in history of this world that has developed based on its lineage to IMF. Mm-hmm. It has never happened. Mm-hmm. And so the question we should be asking ourselves as a nation, what exactly do we want as a nation? Do we want to develop, or we want ad hoc measures?
Right.
If this IMF thing goes on or succeeds, it means that this will be the 17th time
we're going to the IMF.
We are going to the IMF as a nation.
Yeah.
And we are still where we are. And no one seems to be thinking outside the box and be saying that, look, it is time for us to build realistic homegrown policies, that will let us commit ourselves to it to ensure that we develop this country as we are supposed to do. Mm-hmm. How much are we going to get from the IMF?
Right.
Compared to the conditionalities that may come to it?
Right.
And we keep asking ourselves whether or not it is really prudent, or we really believe in the kind of leaders that we have entrusted this country's destiny into.
So you are a disappointed Ghanaian?
No, you see, I am not just a disappointed Ghanaian, because I knew it is not just the IMF. We could have decided not to even go to the IMF. The reality is that the country's economy is in a big mess.
Right.
It's in a big mess.
Right.
And that is why Crusaders Against Corruption, somewhere last 3 months, we made an emphatic call that our finance minister should be sacked with immediate effect. You see, I don't understand why people do not appreciate the fact that that ministry is made up of two things.
Okay.
Finance ministry and economic planning.
Right.
The minister is supposed to plan for the economy. What planning are we having as a nation?
So are you one of those who thinks that the finance minister should be sacked?
No, we have made this very, very clear. And we made this establishment somewhere 2-3 months ago, that the finance minister should be sacked.
But Joe Jackson thinks it won't make any difference.
Why wouldn't it make any difference? We are in a mess. If Joe Jackson believes that we are in a mess, then the question is, who led us to that mess?
But who will be in the best position to clear up that mess?
How can someone who messed up a mess be in a better position to clear up the mess? If he indeed knows how to clear up a mess, would he have led us into this mess? Right. How many years on? 7 years on. We have gotten to a stage where everything, as far as the economy is concerned, seems to be broken. Okay. Our credit rating has come down. We are no more getting sources to borrow from. And that is one of the reasons why they decided to introduce the e-levy, of which you know the position of Crusaders Against Corruption, that we are not for it. So the e-levy should be taken off. Well, the e-levy came on, and from all indication, we are where we are. We are being moved to the IMF. And we are going to the IMF because, why? The IMF, one of the reasons why they want the IMF, us to associate with the IMF, is simply because they want us to get a little credibility when it comes to our credit rating. Right. That is what the economy wants to do. Okay. But where is the economic whiskhead? His Excellency Baumia. Right. Where are the men who constitute the economic management team? Okay. Where is the finance minister? And this is a country where we have a finance minister, substantive finance minister, and yet we've created another portfolio known as Minister of State in charge of finance. Okay. And all these people are being paid with the taxpayers' money. Okay. And yet we are in a mess. All right. It tells you that, look, there's something wrong. And what is wrong is the fact that instead of us concentrating on reducing our expenses, we are rather concentrating on borrowing. And that is where we are now as a nation.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel Wilson. It's always a pleasure having you. Mr. Emmanuel Wilson is the chief crusader with the Crusaders Against Corruption. He's joining us this morning to also express his thoughts about Ghana's decision to engage the IMF. Now, let's watch what Ghanaians have been saying concerning this latest move by the government. Let's watch this. And when we come back, we have an interview with some group, concerned group in Ashanti. They have some serious issues with the former member of parliament for Oda, and I'm talking about the Yao Safumafo. Just briefly, we'll do a quick one with them, and then we'll start our conversation with Arise Ghana group. Stay tuned in.
IMF will give conditionalities. We're just hoping the conditionalities will not prevent government from employing we the youth. A lot of the youth are not having jobs. Me per se, I am not having any proper work. As compared to the time I was in the university, I was hoping that when MPP comes to power, because I voted and supported MPP because I knew they were coming to bring us from IMF. And with coming out from IMF means that we were going to get employment after university. Since 2018 up to date, no job. So going back to IMF means that we are still going to stay again with that job. That would be very bad. So we are hoping that it will, the conditionalities, employment will not be part of that conditionalities that they will take.
I think it's a very wrong idea because I don't know, say, as compared to the strength of the Ghanaian youth and the resources that we have, it's good enough for us not to go for the IMF. During Mahama time, he went for the IMF. Still, there's no improvement. The economy is very bad. So I don't trust this IMF. Why? Because the scripture says, "Curse be on the one who trusts on the nation leaders." Why do we have strength? The youth are there to work.
They've already said they will not go for the IMF, but then they are going for it. It's a nice idea because the economy is struggling a lot, and it's only a fool doesn't have a change of mind. So I think it's a good idea if they are going for it. Yeah. I think they brought the e-levy so that they won't go for the IMF, but they are saying the e-levy is not helping because people are using dubious ways of running away from the e-levy. So I think it's in the right process. They should go for it.
All right, so those were opinions expressed by Ghanaians concerning government's decision to engage the IMF. Now, let's do this quickly before we start our conversation with our Rise Ghana group. Now, the Ashanti youth have been, in fact, they have asked the senior minister, Yao Safumafo, to retract a comment he made about the role some tribes played as against Ashantis towards Ghana gaining independence, and I don't want to pitch two tribes together. That's why I don't want to mention the other tribe. But he mentioned this when he was interacting with some delegates in the Ashanti region. In the Eastern region. But let me read the statement the Honorable Yao Safumafo has issued, which is actually in reaction to what the concerned youth of Ashanti had asked him to do. They had given him 2 weeks ultimatum to retract it. So it's a statement by Honorable Yao Safumafo. My attention has been drawn to circulations of excerpts of a conversation I had recently done with some colleagues relating to the roles of various ethnic groups in the pre-independence struggle. Despite the nature and circumstances of the discussion, I concede that I erred and that these comments caused offense and well-deserved criticism. I must state that a comment was never intended to stir up ethnic tensions between Achims and Ashantis. Ethnic tension is not a thing I want for our country or the NPP. I therefore wish to offer my unqualified and sincere apology for these comments. For my many years of public service, creating divisions is not a thing I will seek to do for a country that I love and spent many decades serving as a public officer. My preoccupation during my long career in public service has been to serve the whole of the country as one unit and not in part. So that's a statement. Good. And it continues to say, beyond party politics, I will continue to share a common objective and vision for the country, even if the pathway to getting there might differ. May the good Lord continue to bless and keep us together as a nation, a unity that our leaders, both past and present, have knitted together or knitted together through their sweat and toil into what we call Ghana. Thank you, Honorable Yao Safumafo. So that's it. Now let me speak to Dr. Ejeni Mboateng. He's also known as Nana Jataba. He is with the concerned Ashanti youth. He's joined us via phone to give us his quick reaction to this statement. Nana Jatapa, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us on Inside Pages on Metro TV.
Most grateful, and thank you for having me this morning.
Right. Now, having read the senior minister's statement, I would want to assume or believe that you would want to allow sleeping dogs to lie. That's it. You have forgiven him, and we can continue with our business as usual.
Grateful once again. It's not enough, my brother.
It's not enough?
It's not enough. He spoke against a whole kingdom. We are expecting him to come to Menchia Palace to apologize. We are expecting him. Look, Kwame Zu make a statement. Former was it the NDC regional secretary? He wrote a letter apologizing to it.
You mean Kwame Zu?
Exactly.
Okay.
But they grant him to Chebi to go and do the unqualified apology, isn't it? So
Yeah.
we want Yao Safumafu. If not Ashanti, where will you be? To be bragging as a senior minister. If not Ashanti region, where would Nanado be as a president? So how possible that you would take Ashantis for granted, and no wonder there is no development under their government, under their tenure? Look at the volume of votes that Ashantis do gives to the former president Mahama, and compared to the infrastructure development. It looks as if even NDC has done better in Ashanti region than the MPP that we have taken it that, oh, this is our party. Not knowing Yao Safumafu and co, they have evil-minded about the Ashanti region. That's why there is no development. So we want him to come to Menchia Palace and apologize. Otherwise, within the 2 weeks, we will advise ourselves.
Okay. All right. So I think that you've made your points. I want to thank you very much, Dr. Ejenim Boateng, for talking to us this morning. You're saying that you want the senior minister to physically turn himself up at the Menchia Palace to apologize to the Ashanti king. Otherwise, you won't forgive him. And you're asking him to do so because of what had happened to the NDC's secretary, Ashanti Regional Secretary, that's Kwame Zu, where he made a similar statement. He was made to appear before the chief. I forgot. I'm waiting for Ipenye to apologize. You want the same thing. You want Osafumafu to do the same thing. Okay, I'm sure that the senior minister has heard you, and he would decide what he wants to do next.